Okay, so I'm going to give you an overview of the different types of educational theory that there are, the different schools they belong to, and in each one some examples of theorists that follow that school of thinking. All of this information has come from the simplypsychology.org website. That's a really good one to get your information from. So let's have a look. This column shows you what theory type we're looking at, and here's some examples. So we'll start with the behaviourists. Behaviourists believe that children learn through the consequences of their behaviour. One of the main proponents of this was a educational theorist called Skinner, and he came up with the whole idea of rewards and sanctions. He did lots of experiments on pigeons, and he came up with the idea that if you reinforce behaviour with either positive rewards or negative punishments, then that you could shape the way that children behave. In fact, he did all his research on pigeons and rats and then generalised to children. The next group of theorists are known as the cognitive theorists, and their ideas are often using a theory as if the brain is a computer. First one that we'll look at now is Piaget, and he was a constructivist. So he believed that children have some knowledge that they need to learn, and they have some ideas in their heads, and they construct new knowledge by joining it to the ideas that are already in their heads. And they do this actively by playing and experimenting. And he had 4 strict stages related to ages that the children have to go through in the right order. Following him, we're going to look at Vygotsky. He was a social constructivist. So like Piaget, he believed that children already had ideas and we need to teach children from where they're at already. He was a social constructivist because he believed that children learn from the important others in their lives, and he came up with the idea of the zone of proximal development, which I think we've already looked at. What a child can do unaided, what they can do with help, and what they can't do yet because that would just be too hard for them. Brunner followed Vygotsky, and he had 3 stages of learning, but not so related to age as Piaget's. Enactive, iconic, and symbolic. So first children learn from their actions, then they learn from pictures, and then they learn from abstract symbols. And he came up with the idea of scaffolding, which is what teaching assistants are doing in school all the time. Another school of thought is the psychoanalytical one, and Freud is probably the person that you've heard of, and his idea involves 3 sections of a person, their id, ego, and superego. I think this little picture explains it really well. The id is your subconscious, kind of your primitive self, and here it's a little devil. The superego is children don't have a superego to start off with. According to Freud, they develop it from learning the norms of their culture, how we are expected to behave, and this is kind of an angel on our other shoulder telling us how we ought to behave. So here's an example. The id might say, I want that ball, I'm going to grab it. And the superego in your other ear, as the child gets older, is going to say, oh, but we'll get in trouble if we do that. And then the ego is kind of the mediator. That's your conscious brain, and it's got to decide what would the best plan of action be. Should we grab the ball or should we not, because that might get us in trouble? I think you can really see how this is put into practice in school, because what we're doing is we're developing the children's superego and helping them to manage their primitive id or primitive urges. Moving on, let's have a look at Maslow. He was a humanist. He rejected behaviorism because it was too fixed. Skinner just believed that if you have a set of experiences that will influence how you behave. He didn't take any account of what's going on inside people's heads. And Maslow also rejected psychoanalytical because too much emphasis on the unconscious, irrational behaviour. Maslow believed that people have free will, and he came up with this idea of the hierarchy of human needs. If we have our basic needs met, we can eventually move up the pyramid step by step and get to a point where we're realising our full potential. You could also have a look at Bandura, excuse me, social learning theory. He believed he came up with the idea of adults as role models. Before Bandura, we were very much in the psychoanalytical way of thinking that if you watch violence, it will be cathartic. This is what Freud believed, and watching violence will drain all your violent urges away. But Bandura tried to prove the opposite, and that if children watch adults' behaviour, they're going to copy it. So if you watch adults being violent, you will become more violent yourself. And finally, we have Merton. He came up with the idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is adults' expectations of children affect their achievements. So if we say to a child, here's your work, I think you're going to do this really well, I know you're a good student and you can come up with an A-star answer, children are actually more likely to manage that than if we say to them, this is going to be too hard for you, don't even bother really. Then the little picture says here, why should I even study when I know I will fail? So you have an expectation, and the expectation creates the behaviour and makes the prophecy come true. I hope that little overview of the whole of educational psychology gives you just an introduction.